Welcome to the ENT Review podcast. I'm Laura Dennis, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Xoran Technologies.
And I'm Rami Alzoubi, National Sales Director for ENT Sales.
And we're here to discuss all things ENT, from clinical advances to practice workflow, from the business of the ENT practice to the latest industry news.
And we're not going to talk about just what's new with ENT. We're also going to tell you what we think using our combined 30 years of experience in the ENT market.
I don't feel old.
I don't look old.
That's right. We're ready to get started?
Yes, we are.
Let's
do it.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about our topic, and we'll tell you what the topic is in a moment, and then we're going to weigh in voting if it's a big issue or a big fuss. Today we're going to talk about ENT practices are changing ownership hands. Is this good or bad? And what does this mean for the industry?
I know that people have seen it in other industries, but this is the first time that I can remember making this big of a transition with this many practices.
I hear you. I think probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, we saw this trend of ENT practices selling their clinics to hospitals. Mm-hmm. And I had the feeling that that was because they really wanted to focus on the clinical aspect and kind of hand over all that back end stuff to someone else, and maybe they just like the idea of being employees again and not having to handle all those aspects of the business.
I definitely agree. Many of the physicians and practices who I've worked with over the years don't necessarily want to do as much of the business side. They definitely want to keep up with the patient care, making sure that they're taking care of their customers. But when it comes to improving business, it's not something that you see very often.
I see some private practice ENTs where they're the only doctor. They're very big into the business of the ENT, and they're really willing to dive into all aspects of their practice. But that means that the work-life balance is so difficult.
And we're seeing that more and more nowadays, where time versus balance is starting to become more and more of a hot topic, especially at different trade shows.
In what sense?
You can only see so many patients a day.
Right.
You can't continue to add more and more patients. So how can you improve the patients that you see, which in turn will help your business? And I think that's at the core of what we're seeing now, where not so much hospitals are buying ENT practices, but we're seeing venture capitalists, we're seeing private equity now creep its way into ENT practices as well.
So what does that mean for the ENT doctor? I mean,
you find it to be a pretty good split, actually, from what I've seen recently, where you're either for it and practices are selling and listening more and more to the different offers, or you're seeing it where people are completely against it. There are 4 or 5 major players in the market now, with PE and VC from what I've been able to see.
Right.
And it seems like almost every practice I've talked to in the last 2 to 3 years has at least considered it or looked at the options.
That is interesting. And then what do you think that means for the practice administrators who have been the ones for the last number of decades making sure that the practice is run correctly, is profitable, is reducing overhead? What does that mean for that practice administrator?
I think that there's a lot of effort on their part. So definitely kudos to the practice administrators. They are the ones who take all this information. They're the ones who get all the different options from these companies to determine what might work or frankly what might not work for their practice. So it's definitely a lot of pressure on them. It also, I think, has started a different kind of talk as well, whereas practices who never really ran their practice like a business are now almost forced to, just because they have they want to displace competition, or they want to renegotiate with insurance. They want to identify challenges, or maybe train their staff better. These are all things that I've heard in the market that VC or PE or somebody purchasing the practice think that they can do better. So there's a strange power struggle now that you're seeing between practices, especially at the administrative level.
I think it's so interesting, and I think it's really great that organizations like Ascent have this opportunity for an average, or not average, your practice administrator who has not had professional development be able to be a part of these organizations to understand how to improve all those aspects of the business of ENT.
Absolutely. I think you have to be able to identify challenges. You have to be able to increase patient communication and expectations as well. One thing that I see that a lot of practices don't strive or even thrive on a lot is outcomes at the end. Do you track outcomes?
Ooh, that's a big one.
And I think that these companies who are coming in to try to buy ENT practices, that's where they think that they can make improvements. So the question is, on whether it's a fuss or an issue, really is how well do you think your practice is ran?
That's a really good point. I think the issue of the big fuss or no big deal is the work-life balance for the clinician, him or herself. Because depends on where you are in your career, what you're looking to achieve. We saw this also happening, for example, with procedures moving from the hospital into the office. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that, doctors realize very quickly that they can spend more time in the office, less early mornings, a more predictable schedule, and patients like it. I would rather go to my doctor's office and get a simple procedure done under local anesthesia than have to go to the hospital. And I think that is indicative of the desires of the ENT community to have that, to be able to kind of determine their own future, determine their own destiny. So it's a very important consideration. For me, it's a big issue.
I see the point where, turning over that control, especially if you've been in private practice for some time now and you kind of want to do it your way, where you don't necessarily have to report to somebody. The problem I have with that is, if you're not enhancing your service line, if you're not adding audiology or other ancillary services, we see more and more ENT practices offering Botox, offering fillers. Competition now is starting to get even more creative. Big box stores are starting to offer audiology. You can go to, Costco or Walmart or any of these kind of types of stores and get a hearing aid pretty quickly and pretty inexpensively. So there also becomes that trade-off, right, between the quality of service that you're getting and kind of what you're experiencing in the office. So
which could go either way, depending upon the personality of the doctor, right?
Sure.
If they want to have a replicable model across different practice locations of ancillary services to ensure that all patients are getting the same access to the same quality of care. It depends whether the clinician wants to be the one handling that or wants to have that handled by this firm that they sell their clinic to. There's really a lot of options out there today. I think there's way more options out there today for your business model in ENT than there ever have been.
I agree, and what's unique about this, and I know it's so decisive and that's not the word.
Divisive?
Yes.
We got it. We got there.
And what's so unique about this situation is that this topic is so divisive, but we've seen it where it's worked and we've seen it where it hasn't worked.
Right.
So there are practices who've been around for years now that were early adopters of kind of had that infusion of cash and then wanting to have that universal model that they could transfer between cities and even states. And we've seen practices who have gone with, kind of getting bought out and just didn't like it.
Right. It's a big decision. Mm-hmm. So what do you vote for? Big issue or big fuss?
I think it's a big fuss. Yeah. Because people make their decision even before they go in a lot. From the feedback that I've gotten back is that you either hate it or you love it. Everybody seems to be entertaining the discussion. I don't know if the physicians are driving that. Obviously, older physicians would love to go with it. Younger physicians want to keep their autonomy. So I think that because you have already come up with, what side you're on, because you already have that preconceived notion of which way you want to go, I think it's a big fuss.
Okay, well, there you have it. The ENT Review, all things ENT, from Rami El-Zubi and Laura Dennis.
We'll see you next time. Make sure you tune into our next podcast.